What's going on here, Diana West?
Well, there's any number of anecdotal pieces to this puzzle. Now, that one's quite good because it comes from Barack Obama himself. But we've had a mailman who delivered mail to Bill Ayers' parents' home in Illinois has attested on a sworn affidavit that Mrs. Ayers discussed Barack Obama and how excited she was at helping him with his education as a foreign student. Again, another little piece. Recently, an ex-Marine has come forward and discussed a conversation he says he's 99% sure that it was Barack Obama in the very early 1980s that he discussed in Hawaii the fact that Barack Obama told him he wanted to be president, and he also told him he was born in Mombasa, Kenya. So we have just a variety of these funny little stories, not least of which would be his own grandmother saying that she saw him being born in Kenya, that would give credence to that story. The whole thing is such an enduring, and I think you say it's courageous to ask these questions. I find the story like eating peanuts. It is fascinating. It is tremendous
Can't
fun.
Stop. Can't help
story.
Yourself.
Can't stop.
Yeah.
And yet
so many people are stopping. But again, before we come to that piece of this and how it sort of fits into your narrative of the death of the grown-up in this country and what perilous state we might be in with respect to our fundamental freedoms and Constitution. Just stay with me one more. I've had people who are probably likely to find most of what we've just described about Barack Obama, what is known, what has been documented, as pretty persuasive, but for one thing, namely that on the day he was born, there was a birth notice published in the Honolulu Gazette or two, whatever it was. And that seems to them to have been, proof positive that he must have been born, as he now maintains, his agent now maintains, in Hawaii. And again, just to recall, folks, as we described at the beginning of the program, that wouldn't be sufficient to ensure that he is eligible to be president of the United States because, according to established case law, he actually has to have two parents who are also natural-born citizens. But, Diana, just respond, if you would, to that particular question. What explanation could there be for this birth announcement in the Honolulu papers?
So much the perfect question, Frank. That is, if your listeners take away one thing, this is the most important point that has come out. The truth of the matter is, and this comes from the investigators of Sheriff Joe Arpaio's cold case posse, they found, and they say they have proof beyond a doubt, that those 1961 newspaper announcements ran in newspapers that regularly also announced the births of foreign-born babies as well as native-born babies, and that the posse also has documented evidence of two adopted children who were 3 years old before their, quote, birth announcement made their way into the newspaper, all of which proves that showing up as a welcomed arrival as a baby did not suggest any other facts pertaining to where you were born, how old you were, anything. So in terms of using that as the anchor against this terrible story, really, but just sort of the thing people like to cling to in pretending or trying not to follow the trail of fraud further. The newspaper announcements are absolutely useless because they were by no means any kind of ironclad guarantee of a native-born child or even a child born at the time of the announcement.
Okay, Diana West, tell us a little bit more about this Sheriff Joe Arpaio and his cold case posse. He has been vilified, as we'll be talking momentarily more about, have most people who've had the temerity to challenge any of this. What else have they found? And maybe go back for a moment to what they found about that long-form birth certificate.
Yes, well, Sheriff Joe Arpaio, I think, was fairly well known as a very brave and strong upholder of American law regarding immigration in particular. He came to national attention in the last few years for his police work in Arizona, Maricopa County, where he, I believe, is the 5-time elected sheriff. Before that, he had a long career, I believe, at the DEA as a DEA official. he is an American hero, and he is tough as nails. John Wayne could have played him. When you watch that press conference, he will not back down on the facts as he has painstakingly gathered them with his group of, I believe, 5 investigators, 2 investigators, 3 lawyers. It might be backwards. It might be 3 investigators and 2 lawyers. And I would say they had 3 key findings. This would come on the March 1st, 2012 press conference that I guarantee you, your listeners' media, local media and national media did not cover. And that to me is just such a crime, such a crime of history. But anyway, the first finding, the most amazing, prominent finding is that the online image of that 1961 long form birth certificate that was prominently displayed at the White House website, is a computer engineered forgery. That is their conclusion. They believe that it originated on a computer, not in 1961 as a document that was then scanned into a computer. And for interested listeners, the entire press conference is available on YouTube, which includes their own illustration of the tests, of the computer tests that they ran on the online certificate and on a control that they created to see what would happen in terms of how a scanned document.
So this was a rigorous forensic analysis by professionals in the business. Mm-hmm. Okay. And their finding is that it's a forgery.
It's a forgery.
Yeah. And the President of the United States, the President, just to put a fine point on it here, but because as you say, many people may not have, witnessed this press conference or heard anything about it for reasons, again, we'll get into momentarily. We have the President of the United States and his support system pushing this document out as an authentic representation of the long form birth certificate, which, as you say, should be the simplest way to clarify this whole problem. It certainly, it seems to me, Diana West, and I gather it seems to you, stinks to high heavens that this particular data point, to say nothing of all the other ones that we've talked about, is with us. So we're going to turn finally in our concluding segment with Diana West to why are we being treated this way? Welcome back. Sheriff Arpaio's cold case posse found some further evidence of, peculiar findings, shall we say, about the Selective Service record of this president.
Yes. Just to put it very briefly and bluntly, they determined that the Selective Service Registration card, which again materialized before our eyes as an online image during the campaign in 2008, is also a forgery, a concocted document. And they also have provided, again on YouTube, their hypothesis of how it was created, and they actually go through a physical creation of a document that looks like the Obama registration card, which boils down to a very strange-looking postmark, and they take you through why they think that's a forgery. It's very stunning information, and what they tried to do was go to the Selective Service Registration Department in Washington and examine the image in person, and they have been denied. Yeah. They have been denied that.
Let's then cut to the chase here. As you say, we have here a series of efforts made to stonewall, to deny access to records in the school years and other periods of Barack Obama's life. We have apparently, at least allegedly, 2 forged documents that have been provided by his immediate coterie. Why on earth, Diana West, are we not hearing more about this? Tell us, among other things, about your own personal experience in trying to bring some of this information to light, or your analysis of it, at least, to light.
Yes, well, I have outlets that have carried my column for years who have informed me of essentially a blanket blackout on anything I write pertaining to the Obama eligibility story, which includes courtroom cases, covering courtroom procedures, covering Sheriff Arpaio's investigation, other newsworthy aspects of this ongoing saga. They just will not run it, and it's extremely disturbing to me for what it says about everything, about our journalism in general. I know of other writers who have been discouraged from covering it by their employers.
Well, you mentioned in one of the earlier segments the experience of this hapless person in the press corps who was essentially jeered into silence and hasn't evidently brought it up again since. So we have an active suppression of this kind of evidence and information on the part of the very interested parties in the White House now. But what is motivating these organs that are, ostensibly, or at least have in the past, found your materials, for example, sufficiently well written and provocative and thoughtful and informative to run them, but won't? And draw from that, if you will, the larger picture of why is this information being suppressed by, the Fourth Estate, the press that is supposed to be a critically important part under our system of government of keeping people honest.
Yes. I can't answer the question with true knowledge because I honestly don't know, but I think that the implications are very strongly underscored and important for people to understand. We are not operating in a free society at this point when you have news organizations and very large news organizations, the largest in the country, living and operating in fear either of investigation, for example, FCC investigation, I've heard, is one threat that comes down, in fear of losing, quote, access, which is much too valued in Washington. People are much too prey to that sort of blackmail. Again, ridicule, ostracism. I mean, these kinds of things are what you expect to find in an authoritarian or dictatorial society, not a free republic operating with the First Amendment protections. We are not operating under those free country protections any longer. And people
it's a kind of self-censorship, in part at least, in response to these outside pressures. Yeah. Tell me, just coming back to Sheriff Arpaio for a moment, am I right that he has been directly threatened, or not just threatened, but is now under active investigation by the Justice Department? I'm sure that they would argue, well, this has nothing to do with, his involvement in trying to find the truth out about the president's eligibility. But do you think this is an accident, comrade, as the Soviets used to say?
Well, it seems hard to imagine a scenario in which it could be an accident, but I'm not privy to any special information regarding that investigation. Certainly, given what we know, it does seem to be quite a coincidence that he is under this kind of assault at this point. Again, part of this effort to marginalize. I mean, you've had even representatives of the very, very few Congress people who have actually even just mentioned the subject, such as Representative Cliff Stearns of Florida. He merely mentioned the notion of examining the evidence pertaining to Obama's eligibility, and they came down on him like a ton of bricks with the White House Communications Director, Dan Pfeiffer, who was one of the presenters of the online image last year, actually tweeting about it, calling into question his eligibility to conduct Solyndra hearings. I mean, the whole thing is so incredible. It's fantastic.
What it is it seems to me reminiscent and redolent, really, of how totalitarians suppress the truth. And we interestingly enough had on earlier this week, Dinah West, Paul Kenger, who, as you may know, is the author of a forthcoming book called The Communist. Frank Marshall Davis, The Untold Story of Barack Obama's Mentor. And this follows any number of other books. Aaron Klein's comes to mind about, you mentioned Bill Ayers as one of them, obviously Jeremiah Wright, Rashid Khalidi, and others who were very formative influences on this president. And what they have in common, really, is a ruthlessness with respect to suppression of unhelpful information. Saul Alinsky was, I guess, the past master of it. Freeze, fix, and
Lenin.
And Lenin before him, of course. So, Diana, we've got 2 minutes left. Summarize, if you would, where we are at the moment.
I think that we are in a very dangerous state. I have had many people tell me, including journalists, tell me that they are afraid to report the facts of this story because they believe it will lead to violence in the street. which to me suggests we are no longer, again, living in a free society. We're living in fear, in kind of a thugocracy, if that's how we're operating. And I would urge people, I think that everyone has a very important role to play in terms of notifying Congress that this must be investigated. There is actually, I believe, a petition out there that was sponsored by WorldNetDaily.com, which has done yeoman work on this whole issue, trying to bring Congress to its responsibility, because again, I think that's where this must end up. This must end up in a congressional investigation of the documentation of Barack Obama. And people across the country can light up those phones and give the congressmen some backbone, which sorely they are lacking. And it's very important that people care about this issue in order to bring it to any kind of conclusion or resolution, and just to bring the ship of state back to a steady course, because this is not a functioning or healthy nation if we cannot even know the identity of our president.
Amen. Diana West, we have to leave it at that.